before they introduced me and they said I was an international style blogger, which I enjoy that title very much, but not something I use in everyday life or something I actually think is totally true. If it's international, it's more like U.S. and Canada. Sort of like the Rochester airport. We don't extend too far. We only have a couple local flights. I have this style blog, and it began to become popular. I was writing it. It started to become popular. People started to know who I was, or were following it, and sort of put two and two together. And it was interesting. I'd go to an event or somewhere, and a reader of my site would sort of come up to me, and they would say, I'm a huge fan of your site. It's like my favorite blog. And then they would look at me and sort of give me this weird look, as if they were sort of disappointed in, I was their favorite style blogger. And this is like what that guy looks like. And I thought he was going to be amazing. And this guy's not that amazing. So that kind of hurt, but I think it was kind of true. In a sense, the perception wasn't really meeting the reality because my site is so much more about clothing, and I'm so much more interested in clothing and style as opposed to fashion with a capital F. And I think that when people would meet me, they were expecting this sort of fashionable thing, and I wasn't necessarily that. So it took me, it took I think everyone a while to sort of come to terms with that, with me and sort of the whole program. But I was doing this site. I started it in 2007. Actually, I was here in Cleveland when it started. It was a wonderfully beautiful day outside in December. It was snowing, and obviously I was stuck inside. So I was kind of looking around on the internet, sort of cruising some of the style sites that were out there at the time, and I just kept thinking that everything I'm seeing wasn't sort of capturing what I was interested in, my sort of perspective on the world. So I thought, well, I'll start doing this, and I was interested in all these different types of things like history and I was interested in clothes, but not fashion with a capital F. And I thought, there's a really interesting intersection between these two things, because specifically, if you think about men's clothing, it's not something that's totally based on emotion necessarily like women's clothing is, or women's fashion. It's not necessarily based on movement the way that women's fashion is. It's much more linear. It's rooted in history and in military uses and applications and solving problems and all these things. And as someone that was always interested in the why, what goes into things, why things are the way they are, I thought, oh, this is an interesting sort of exploration. So I said, well, I'm going to start this site. I called it Continuously, and I sort of became this unwitting, style blogger, reluctant, weird, not fashionable style blogger from Cleveland, which didn't give me any street cred. Terrible. So I'm the guy from Cleveland. Everyone's disappointed when they meet me. So I'm interested in fashion. I'm interested in history. I also, because I grew up here, I remember the Plain Dealer did this series that, it looks crazily ominous on the screen up there, called The Quiet Crisis. And I just remember reading about, and it was essentially about the closing of manufacturing in Northeast Ohio, and sort of when the steel mills were closing. And I remember reading about this and always kind of being obsessed with the industrial process and in manufacturing and in factories, and these huge buildings would always capture my attention as we're driving past the flats and the steel yards and all that stuff. So I remember this happening, and at the time I'm interested. I don't know where this is going, but it had this crazy impact on me, and it's something that has always stayed with me, and it's something I've always thought about. Just why manufacturing changes and sort of the effect it had on me as a kid. So as I grow up and I move to New York City and I start to work in the clothing business, I start to think about where that the manufacturing intersects with clothing and sort of how those two things work together. And then when I would be buying clothes, I would be thinking about where things are made, and I'm looking at tags, and it's something my dad at home was always doing, is talking about sort of, where's this thing from and what went into it, and it's not always about nationalism or patriotism. It was just about sort of, why does this cost this, and where was it made, and are those two things related, and what's behind it. So I'm thinking about clothing, and so I start to explore this a little bit more, and I start to write about this on my site. And it's interesting, while this is all happening, the economy is sort of crashing, and the recession is in full swing, and at the same time, I'm doing the site, and as it happens, men's clothing starts to become really popular. A lot of younger guys start to be interested in, how they look and their appearance and how they dress. And there's retailers like J. Crew started to open men's only stores. And it's a weird thing to say, but there's this convergence of the recession and an interest in exploring style from a men's perspective online, and my site, and I sort of just was at the center of this, and people just started to really latch on to the idea of what goes into the things that you use every day. So there's this idea about, everyone knows about the farm to table movement and about organic foods, and everyone's thinking about sort of where the things that they eat or go into their body are coming from, and people are starting to think about that from think about their clothing from that perspective. And then we sort of took it another step further and said, what's the history behind these companies, what goes into making them, where are they made, who are the people, what does it look like? And I started to just explore this through my site, and just the Made in America movement just started to pick up steam, and it just was something that I always was interested in. So at the time, or leading up to me starting my site, I'd worked for, growing up in Cleveland was a huge influence, but then I worked for this Japanese company, and a huge billion-dollar Japanese clothing brand. And I was working in the marketing department there, and I just started to learn so much about the way that the Japanese media and the consumers approach the things that they buy. And it's this amazing culture of knowing everything that goes into everything, and the way that they understand the process and the people, and the way that they're so obsessed with everything from if something, they're obsessed with everything that goes into what they use, but also if it's French, they want it to be made in France, and they sort of demand that, and they never let go of the idea of, if something is traditionally American, it should be made in America. And I think that for a long time, sort of before the recession, a lot of people in America just started thinking about price and didn't really care, where anything was made, and they weren't really concerned. And then the recession happened, and a lot of people started to think about, what goes into their clothing, and they wanted to latch on to this idea of a time when America was great, maybe when, America wasn't, at its fighting best. And, times were tough, and they wanted things that were authentic and things that lasted. And this is something that, interestingly, the Japanese just, they never stopped thinking about those things, and something we did. So I was, working at this Japanese company, shocked that they were just, the culture of, how much they cared about these things. And I was thinking, God, I'm like ashamed of myself, because I don't really even care about, the American things as much as these people do. And it was just a truly eye-opening experience to go halfway around the world and to see magazines that are just devoted to all these different types of, crazy specific, hyper intense, expressions of different types of things, be it style or certain products or all these different things. They were obsessed with it. There were whole magazines dedicated to like American denim and American work boots, And, a lot of these, if you I would start going to all these factories, and they would say, 3/4 of our business is coming from Japan. And it's like, I'd never even heard of this company. So it was amazing to me that this was all happening, and it's sort of under our nose. And then I started this site, and I was helping to get the word out about some of these smaller American companies, and people were, really latching onto that, and, really wanted to explore that further. So there's a really interesting story of a Japanese, an interesting perspective on an American company via the Japanese. So I'm in Tokyo, and I discover this bag company. And we go in the store. It's this beautiful store, and on the wall, it says Ohio and Tokyo. And I thought, this is so weird. This is probably like just some fake, like they're making a backstory, and they chose Ohio as like some quintessential American place. And so we're asking the guys that work there, what's the story with Ohio? And he's like, oh, this company, they're from Parma Heights, Ohio. And I was like, this is crazy. And the guy didn't speak very much English, and I was trying to explain like, oh, I'm from there. That's where I'm from too. And then I, we're looking at all the bags, and we're learning about this company, and it's this company called Drifter, and this is their store, headquarters, factory in Parma Heights. And, it's just, I'd lived here my whole life, never heard of this company, never driven by it. I couldn't believe it. I discovered it in Tokyo. I flew all the way around the world to find this place in Parma Heights. So this is the store in Parma Heights. And this is a really great expression of the difference between the Japanese perspective on Americana and the American perspective on Americana. And sort of, this is, this doesn't look like the most evolved retail experience, although they are making everything at this place. So it's an amazing story and an amazing company. And this is the store in Japan. And they have this beautiful, amazingly merchandised store. And it's just shocking to see that this is the way that it's interpreted, and just the level of attention and detail and appreciation that the Japanese have just for American things, or for everything in general. So, as I'm doing my site, I took a lot of inspiration from what the Japanese were doing, and sort of how they were interpreting our culture, and how I thought I could help sort of expand on that. And so if you read a Japanese magazine, they would go to a factory and take pictures and document the process of making things. And we're talking about opening a store, and then we thought, maybe it's not the best idea to open a store because we both have full-time jobs, and I'm doing the blog and all this stuff's happening. But then we thought, we should open a store for a weekend and help people, invite all these brands that we're friends with and that we know are making interesting things and well-made things, and invite them to a space and have them set up like a weekend pop-up shop. But at the shop, you'll be able to go and meet the people that either make the things that you buy, or meet the designer, or strip away the bureaucracy of all the marketing and have this real experience and this authentic experience with people. So in 2009, we started this thing called the PopUp Flea, and it was meant to be sort of a pop-up shop meets a pop-up flea market. And we invited 12 of our friends that had brands, and some people showed up, and we were too dumb to know that we shouldn't, or too dumb or too smart. We've done 6 of these events, and last time we did it, we had 50 vendors, and we had 16,000 people showed up. So 16,000 people over a weekend to shop, to meet these people. Our ideas were always that even if you don't end up buying anything, it's like, come talk to the people that make the things that you use. And it's been this amazing sort of evolution of retail in a way. So in doing the PopUp Flea and looking at the response and all the thousands of people that showed up, and doing the site and writing ACL and having so many people follow it, it's been this amazing experience of people really wanting to latch onto things that are authentic and real, and exploring things that maybe aren't disposable or trivial, or looking at things that are a little bit more long-lasting. Ended up being this amazing source of of energy, inspiration for me, and basically changed my career and my life ever since. And all of this was sort of predicated on the idea of, if it didn't, I'm going to put all this time and energy into this blog, and if it doesn't end up being anything, I'm going to be happy that, I have the journal, I have all these entries, I have all this stuff just for my own personal enjoyment and interest. And I was willing to take that risk and, pour all my time and energy into something that, even if it didn't work, it would be fine. And that was the source of all of my success. And I always thought, if it doesn't work out, I'll just move in with my parents in Cleveland, and it'll be fine. So thank you guys so much.